Imagine discovering that your husband and your own grandmother were having an affair under your roof. Sounds like a soap opera plot, doesn't it? But this was my reality at age 35. Hello, dear viewers. My name is Betty. I'm 72 years old now, and I'm going to tell you the most painful story of my life. But before I start, if you're watching this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to receive updates. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my stories reach so many different places. Let's go back to 1965. I was a 25-year-old woman. I worked as a seamstress at a store downtown in Philadelphia. I lived with my parents in a small 2-story house in the suburbs. My life was simple but happy. That's when I met Howard. He came to the store to get a suit made for his brother's wedding. Tall, strong, with a smile that seemed to light up the room. It was love at first sight, as they used to say back then. Howard worked as a mechanic, had his own shop, and was respected in the neighborhood. We started dating in December 1965, and by July 1967, we were married. It was a simple but beautiful ceremony at St. Joseph's Church. I wore a dress I sewed with my own hands, with delicate lace I had saved for years, dreaming of this moment. During our first months of marriage, we lived at my parents' house. It was cramped, but we were saving for our own place. My father, Joseph, and my mother, Emily, adored Howard. My father always said, "This young man will go far, Betty. You got lucky." In March 1968, the tragedy that would change our lives happened. My parents went to spend a weekend at the Jersey Shore, at a cousin's house. On their way back Sunday night, a truck crossed into their lane on the highway. The impact was so violent that the car was unrecognizable. There were no survivors. Suddenly, I found myself without a father or mother. It was a terrible shock. I was an only child. I had no one left besides my parents. Well, there was Grandma Gertrude, my mother's mother, who lived in a nursing home nearby. She was 83 at the time. When my parents died, we decided to bring her to live with us. After all, she was my only blood relative left, and I thought it would be good to have her company during that difficult time. I inherited my parents' house, which was a blessing. Howard and I now had our own home, and with Grandma Gertrude living with us, it seemed we were rebuilding a family. I continued working as a seamstress, and Howard was doing well with his shop. We lived simply, but we had everything we needed. In 1970, after trying for almost 3 years, I finally got pregnant. It was an immense joy. Howard really wanted a boy. And when Kevin was born on October 23, 1970, he couldn't contain his pride. Our beautiful, healthy baby, with his father's eyes and, as they said, a nose just like mine. It was a difficult birth. I spent almost 20 hours in labor. I had complications, and the doctor warned that I couldn't have more children. I suffered a bit with the news, but I came to terms with it. After all, we had Kevin, our treasure, our only child. He would be the center of our lives, and that's what mattered. Grandma Gertrude helped as much as she could. For an 85-year-old lady, she was surprisingly active. She made her bed by herself, sometimes swept the kitchen, and even held Kevin in her arms when he was a baby. I thought it was a blessing to have her nearby. She told stories about my mother as a child, talked about my grandmother, whom I barely knew, kept our family memories alive. Howard always treated Grandma Gertrude with great affection and patience. He never complained when she repeated the same stories. He never got irritated when she confused people's names or forgot where she had put things. "She's your mother's mother, Betty," he would say. "We need to take good care of her." The first years after Kevin's birth were happy times. We worked hard, saved money, dreamed about the future. Our son was cheerful, healthy, intelligent. He started walking early, a little after 10 months. Talking took a bit longer. When he turned 2 in October 1972, he only spoke a few isolated words. Mommy, Daddy, Grandma, water, no. But he communicated very well, pointing at things, pulling us by the hand to show what he wanted. It was around that time, late 1972, that I began to notice changes in Howard's behavior. He started coming home earlier, on days when I went grocery shopping or visited friends. He began taking better care of his appearance, started showering as soon as he got home from work, even before dinner. At the time, I thought he was just taking more care with his appearance, maybe because he had gained a little weight since we got married. Grandma Gertrude also seemed different. She was quieter, avoided looking me in the eyes when we talked. Sometimes I would enter the kitchen and the two of them were talking, but they would stop as soon as they saw me. "We were talking about Kevin," Howard would say. "That child is the joy of this house." I noticed these small changes, but I pushed any suspicion away. After all, they were the two people I trusted most in the world. Howard was a good husband, hard-working, never came home drunk, never mistreated me. And Grandma Gertrude? Well, she was 87 in 1972. She was my grandmother, my only blood relative. How could I suspect them? But destiny had other plans, and the truth would come to light in the most unexpected way possible through the innocent eyes of my 2-year-old son. It was on a Tuesday in November 1972. The weather was cloudy, threatening rain. Kevin had a slight fever, nothing serious, but I decided not to take him to daycare. I called the store where I worked as a seamstress and let them know I wouldn't be coming in. My boss complained we had a lot of work, but she understood. A mother is a mother, right? Shortly after lunch, Howard called from the shop, saying he needed a document that was in our bedroom drawer. He asked if I could bring it to him. It was strange. He never asked me to come to the shop, but I didn't suspect anything. The document was important, he said. It was about financing new tools. "I'll just give Kevin some medicine, wait for him to fall asleep, and then I'll bring it to you," I said. I gave my son the medicine, and he soon fell asleep. He was still a bit limp from the fever. I went to the bedroom, got the document from the drawer, called Mrs. Kathy, our neighbor, and asked her to keep an eye on Kevin while I quickly went to the shop. "I'll be back in half an hour at most," I told her. "Kevin is sleeping. He shouldn't be any trouble." I left the house, walked to the bus stop, but when I was almost there, I had a strange feeling, an uneasiness. What if Kevin woke up frightened? What if the fever came back stronger? I decided to go back home and call Howard, telling him I couldn't come. Back then, telephones were rare, but we had one at home, installed when my parents were still alive. I walked back quickly. I didn't want to knock on the door to avoid waking Kevin. I used my key. I entered very quietly through the front door. I was surprised by the silence. Where was Mrs. Kathy? That's when I heard strange noises coming from Grandma Gertrude's room. It sounded like someone was... No, it couldn't be. I walked on tiptoe down the hallway. Grandma's bedroom door was ajar. What I saw at that moment froze the blood in my veins. Howard and my grandmother in her bed, the two of them together like husband and wife, my husband and my 87-year-old grandmother. I stood paralyzed at the door, unable to speak, unable to scream, unable to move. It was as if the world had stopped. My husband and my grandmother in my own house, the house I inherited from my parents. A scene so absurd, so impossible, that for a moment I thought I was having a nightmare. The worst was the look of surprise on their faces. It wasn't shame, it wasn't regret, it was just surprise at being caught, as if I were the intruder, as if I were doing something wrong by entering that room. "Betty!" Howard shouted, jumping out of bed, trying to cover himself with the sheet. "Didn't you go to the shop?" Grandma Gertrude remained lying down, staring at me with an expression I'll never forget. A mixture of defiance and indifference, as if to say, "Now what are you going to do?" I don't know where I found the strength, but I managed to find my voice. "How could you?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "How could you do this to me?" Howard started getting dressed hurriedly, stammering excuses. "Betty, it's not what you're thinking. It was just this once. I don't know what happened." "Liar!" I shouted, remembering all the small signs I had ignored. "It wasn't just this once. It's been going on for a while, hasn't it? How long have you been deceiving me?" It was Grandma Gertrude who answered, with a coldness that chilled my soul. Since before Kevin was born, she said, sitting up in bed. For an 87-year-old lady, she seemed strangely strong at that moment. Since I came to live here, her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Since before Kevin was born. That meant for more than 2 years, perhaps since my parents died, since 1968. Why? That was all I could say. Howard tried to approach me, but I backed away. "Don't touch me," I yelled. "Never again." Suddenly, I heard a small whimper coming from the hallway. Kevin. Oh God, Kevin. With all that shouting, he had woken up. And where is Mrs. Cathy, who was supposed to be watching him? "Where is Mrs. Cathy?" I asked, wiping away my tears. "I dismissed her as soon as you left," Howard admitted, head down. He said he had come home early from the shop and that he would take care of Kevin himself. All planned. He had purposely gotten me out of the house, invented that story about the document so he could be alone with my grandmother. And my 2-year-old son was there in the house while they... I ran to the hallway and found Kevin standing at his bedroom door, crying softly, clutching his teddy bear to his chest. My heart broke seeing that scene. He looked so scared, so confused. "Mommy's here, my love," I said, picking him up, holding him against me, as if he might disappear at any moment. That's when he pointed to Grandma's room and said, "Daddy, Grandma, no," and made a gesture with his little hand, clapping them together. I froze. It wasn't the first time he had seen that scene. I looked at Howard, who had gotten dressed and was standing in Grandma's doorway. "He's seen you before, hasn't he?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I don't know what you're talking about," Howard tried to pretend. "He's just a child, he can barely talk properly." But Kevin kept repeating, "Daddy, Grandma, no," and making that gesture. Children don't lie, they don't make up things like that, and suddenly it all made sense. The times Kevin cried for no apparent reason when left alone with the two of them, the way he started avoiding sitting on his father's or Grandma's lap. He had seen it. My innocent little boy had been exposed to something no child should see, something he couldn't understand, but instinctively knew was wrong. At that moment, something inside me changed. The pain and humiliation were replaced by a cold, calculated anger. They hadn't just betrayed me, but also my son. They had stained his purity, the trust he had in the people who should protect him. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave my house," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "What?" Howard seemed shocked. "Betty, let's talk. We can resolve this." "There's nothing to resolve," I cut him off. "This house was my parents'. It's in my name. You have 1 hour. If you don't leave by then, I'll call the police." "You can't throw me out like this," Grandma Gertrude said, finally getting out of bed. "I'm your grandmother, your only family." I looked at her, this 87-year-old lady whom I had welcomed into my home, whom I had cared for with all my affection, and felt a mixture of disgust and pity. "You are no longer my family," I said, with a calmness I didn't know I had. "My family now is just my son." I took Kevin to our room. My room? Because from that day on, Howard would no longer sleep there. I closed the door and stayed hugging my son, rocking him until he fell back asleep. I could hear the sounds of the two of them packing, arguing quietly, but it all seemed very distant, like a movie I was watching, not my life falling apart. When Kevin fell asleep, I left the room. Howard was in the living room with 2 large suitcases. Grandma Gertrude was sitting in the armchair with a small suitcase beside her, looking fragile and old again. "Where will she go?" I asked Howard, without looking at my grandmother. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe to a nursing home." "I'll call my aunt in Allentown," I decided. Aunt Janet was actually my great-aunt, Grandma Gertrude's sister. They didn't get along, but it was the only option at that moment. I went to the phone and dialed the number. I explained to Aunt Janet, without going into details, that I needed her to take in Grandma Gertrude for a while. She complained but eventually agreed. "I'll put her on the train tomorrow morning," I said. "Will someone pick her up at the station?" We arranged everything. That night, Grandma Gertrude would sleep on the living room couch. Howard would have to figure it out. "Where will you stay?" I asked him, not out of concern, but out of pure curiosity. "I have a small room at the back of the shop," he said. "I can sleep there." I nodded. It was a cubicle without a bathroom, with just a sink and a toilet in the corner that he used when he needed to work late. Perfect for him. That first night was the hardest. After the two of them left, Howard to the shop, Grandma Gertrude to the living room couch, I locked my bedroom door and collapsed. I cried all the tears I had held back in front of them. I cried for the betrayal, the humiliation, the end of my marriage, the loss of my only blood relative, but mainly I cried for my son. How would I explain to him when he grew up that his father and great-grandmother had done something so terrible? How would I protect him from the malicious comments that would certainly come when people found out? At some point in the early morning, exhausted from crying so much, I fell asleep. I woke up with Kevin poking me, saying, "Mommy, water!" It was a new day. A day when I would have to be strong, not for me, but for my son. I got up, gave him water, changed his diaper, dressed him in clean clothes. He seemed better from the fever. He asked about his father, about the teddy bear he had forgotten in the living room. Pretending a normalcy that was far from what I felt, I took him to the kitchen for breakfast. Grandma Gertrude was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Hunched shoulders, trembling hands, eyes red from crying too. "Betty," she began. "Can we talk?" "We have nothing to talk about," I cut her off, putting Kevin in his high chair. "Your train leaves at 10 o'clock. Be ready." I prepared oatmeal for Kevin, coffee for me. I acted as if she wasn't there. When we finished, I took my son to the room to get him ready. The three of us would go to the train station, me, Kevin, and Grandma Gertrude. Afterward, we would stop by the shop to pick up the car documents that were with Howard. I would need them to sell the car. I had already decided that I didn't want anything that reminded me of my marriage. The ride to the station was silent. Grandma Gertrude tried to speak several times, but I just turned up the volume on the taxi's radio. Kevin, sensing the tension, stayed quiet in my lap. At the platform, waiting for the train, she made one last attempt. "My granddaughter," she said, her voice trembling. "I know you won't forgive me, but I want you to understand." "Understand what?" I cut her off. "That while I was working, taking care of the house, worrying about you, you were sleeping with my husband. There's nothing to understand." "I loved him," she whispered so softly that I almost didn't hear over the noise of the station. "I think I still do." I looked at her in disbelief. Love? She was talking about love, an 87-year-old lady and a 36-year-old man. "You don't know what love is," I said, holding Kevin closer to me. "Love is what I feel for my son. It's wanting to protect, care for, make happy. What you feel. I don't know what it is, but it's not love." The train arrived, whistling loudly. I helped her board. I handed her the small suitcase, gave her the envelope with the money for the ticket, and a little more for the first days at Aunt Janet's. "Goodbye, Grandma," I said with no emotion in my voice. She looked at me one last time, eyes full of tears, and said something I never forgot. "One day you'll understand that we don't choose who we love. I just hope it's not too late." The train departed, taking away the only person in my family who was still alive. I stood there on the platform, holding my son in my arms, watching the cars move away until they disappeared around the bend. I didn't know yet, but that would be the last time I would see my grandmother alive. From the train station, I took another taxi straight to Howard's auto shop. Kevin was tired, rested his head on my shoulder, and stayed quiet during the entire journey. I myself could barely organize my thoughts. In less than 24 hours, my life had turned upside down. The shop was on a busy street in the neighborhood. It was a large garage with a metal sign that read, "Howard's Auto Repair, General Mechanics." He had started small, with just one car lift and some basic tools. Now he employed 3 young men and serviced the best cars in the area. He was doing well, very well. "Wait here," I asked the taxi driver. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." I got out of the taxi with Kevin in my arms and entered the shop. The sound of metal against metal, the smell of oil and grease, the open cars showing their insides, that world that had always been Howard's, never mine. He was there, in blue overalls dirty with grease, leaning over the engine of a Volkswagen. He seemed focused, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed our family the day before. "Howard," I called, my voice firmer than I expected. He turned around surprised. He clearly didn't expect to see me there, much less with Kevin. He wiped his hands on a cloth that was in his overalls pocket and came in our direction. "Betty," he said, looking around, worried that the employees would hear our conversation. "What are you doing here?" "I came to get the car documents," I said, getting straight to the point. "You have them, don't you?" "Yes, in the office," he replied, confused. "But why do you need them now?" "I'm going to sell the car," I explained, without beating around the bush. "I need the money to restart my life." "Our life," I added, looking at Kevin, who was observing his father with curious eyes. "Sell it? But how will you get around? How will you take Kevin to daycare and go shopping?" "That's not your problem anymore," I cut him off. "The documents, please." He sighed, defeated, and signaled for me to follow him to the small office at the back of the shop. It was a cramped room with a metal desk, a chair, and shelves full of folders and parts catalogs. In a corner, I saw the thin mattress where he had slept, an open suitcase with wrinkled clothes. He opened a drawer, sorted through some folders, and took out a brown envelope. "Everything is here," he said, handing me the car document, payment receipts, manual. I took the envelope and put it in my purse. I was ready to leave when he grabbed my arm. "Betty, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "About us, about Kevin, about the future." I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. A face I knew so well, that I had loved for so long. Now I could only see falsehood in it. "Don't touch me," I said, pulling away. "Never again." "Please," he insisted. "It was a mistake, madness. I can't explain how it started, how I let this happen, but it's over. I swear it's over." "Of course it's over," I agreed. "Our marriage is over. Your chance to be Kevin's father is over. Everything is over." "You can't keep me away from my son," he protested, his voice rising a bit. "I have rights." "Do you really?" I asked, keeping calm. "And if I tell the judge what you were doing with my 87-year-old grandmother in my house, with our young child nearby? Do you think any judge will give you any rights after that?" He went pale. He knew I was right. Back then, a scandal like that would be his ruin. He would not only lose his son, but also his customers, the community's respect, everything. "What do you want?" he asked, defeated. "Divorce," I answered without hesitation. Quick, uncontested. "You give up custody of Kevin, but you can see him occasionally, always in my presence. And child support, of course, not for me, for your son." "And if I don't agree?" "Then I'll tell everything to your family, your friends, your customers. Everyone will know what kind of man you are." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes full of a mixture of anger and despair. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he agreed. "I'll do as you want." "Great," I said, adjusting Kevin in my arms. "My lawyer will contact you this week." I turned my back and left the office. I crossed the shop without looking at anyone and returned to the taxi that was still waiting for me. "Home, please," I asked the driver. But as the car moved away, I realized I no longer knew where home was. That little 2-story house in the suburbs that had belonged to my parents, that had seen my marriage grow and then crumble, no longer seemed like a home. It was just a place full of memories I wanted to forget. In the following weeks, I made decisions that would forever change the course of my life. First, I sold the car. a 1969 Beetle that Howard had bought 2 years before. I didn't need it. I had never learned to drive anyway. Then I looked for a lawyer recommended by a client from the store where I worked as a seamstress. Dr. Solomon, an older gentleman who listened to me with patience and without judgment. I told him everything, every sordid detail. He wrote everything down and assured me that the divorce would be quick, given the circumstances. He won't want this to come to light, Dr. Solomon explained. He'll accept all your terms. And he really did. Less than 2 months later, in January 1973, I was officially divorced. At that time, divorce was rare, shameful. People in the neighborhood whispered when I passed by, invented stories about the reason for the separation. None came close to the truth. So absurd it seemed like a lie. The money from the car, added to the savings I had kept over the years, without Howard knowing, gave me a small financial cushion, but I knew I needed something more. I couldn't continue as a seamstress forever. The salary barely supported me and Kevin, even with the child support that Howard paid religiously. That's when I had an idea. Since I was a girl, I loved making sweets. I had learned from my mother, who in turn had learned from her mother. Not Grandma Gertrude, but the other grandmother I barely knew. I made cakes, puddings, custards that everyone praised. "Betty, this dessert is divine," friends would say when they tasted them. I started small, making birthday cakes by order. I spread the word among the customers at the sewing store, among the mothers at Kevin's daycare, at the church I attended. Soon I had orders for every weekend, but the big turning point happened by chance. A very important client of the store, Mrs. Theodora, wife of a wealthy industrialist, tasted one of my cakes at a party and sought me out the next day. "My dear," she said, "I want you to make the desserts for my granddaughter's Sweet 16. It will be a party for 200 people at the country club." I panicked. 200 people at the country club was the chance of a lifetime, but how would I do it alone? "Mrs. Theodora," I began hesitantly, "I'm honored, but I don't know if I can do so much by myself." "Hire help," she responded, as if it were obvious. "I'll advance you half the amount, and if it turns out well, as I expect, you'll have guaranteed work for many other parties." So I did. I hired 2 neighborhood ladies to help me. We rented an industrial oven for that week. We worked day and night. They were the most beautiful and delicious sweets I had ever made in my life. The success was immediate. After that party, I never stopped. Orders multiplied. Suddenly, I was earning more with the sweets than I ever earned as a seamstress. 6 months later, I made a bold decision. I left my job at the store and opened my own business. I rented a small shop on a busy street, bought the necessary equipment, hired 2 more helpers, and inaugurated Betty's Sweets. And do you know where this shop was located? Exactly across from Howard's auto shop. It wasn't planned, I swear. Or maybe deep down it was. The store had been vacant for months. The rent was reasonable, the location excellent, but I can't deny the satisfaction I felt when I signed the contract and realized that every day Howard would see my business grow, my clientele increase, my life flourish without him. The day of the inauguration, in September 1973, was one of the happiest of my life. Kevin, already almost 3 years old, looked beautiful in a little blue outfit that I had sewn especially for the occasion. I made a point of placing him in the window next to the most beautiful sweets, so everyone could see. I saw Howard standing in the doorway of his shop, watching from afar. Our gazes met for an instant. There was no more anger in my eyes, only a serenity that came from the certainty that I was on the right path. In the months that followed, my bakery prospered beyond expectations. People lined up to buy my sweets. I had to hire more helpers, buy more equipment, extend the opening hours. Meanwhile, Howard's shop seemed increasingly empty. It wasn't a coincidence. Many of my clients were former clients of his. The women, especially, preferred to bring their car to my shop while buying sweets, then take it to the competing garage 2 blocks away. No one told me directly, but rumors about Howard's affair had spread, distorted like in a game of telephone. They said he had cheated on his wife with a much older woman. Some said it was his mother-in-law, others that it was an elderly client. No one ever imagined it was my own grandmother, but the fact is that his reputation was tarnished, and it affected his business. In March 1974, I received a call from Aunt Janet in Allentown. Grandma Gertrude had passed away in her sleep. At 89 years old, she simply didn't wake up one Sunday morning. "Will you come to the funeral?" Aunt Janet asked, her voice neutral, without judging my possible refusal. I thought for a long moment. The initial anger had given way to a deep sadness for what could have been, for the grandmother-granddaughter relationship we lost forever. But I couldn't forgive her. "No, I still won't be able to go," I finally replied. "I have Kevin, the shop. It's complicated." "I understand," she said, and I'm sure she really did understand. "I'll take care of everything here." After hanging up the phone, I sat in the small back room of the shop and cried. Not for Grandma Gertrude, not exactly. I cried for everything I had lost, for the family I would never have again, for the shattered dreams. But when I dried my tears, I looked around and saw what I had built from nothing. A thriving shop, a new life, a promising future for me and my son. The pain had transformed me, made me stronger, more determined. That same day, I made another important decision. I would change the name of the shop from Betty's Sweets to Victory Sweets, because that's what I had achieved, a victory over betrayal, over pain, over the despair that almost consumed me. And in a way, that was my true revenge. Not the shop across from his garage, not the customers who stopped frequenting his business. It was showing Howard, the world, and mainly myself, that I was capable of being happy on my own, of building something from scratch, of transforming the greatest pain of my life into my greatest strength. It was just the beginning of my new journey, and for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited to see where it would take me. The following years were of intense work and growth. Kevin started elementary school in 1976. A smart, cheerful boy who didn't seem to carry any mark from the traumatic events he witnessed when he was so young. He saw his father occasionally, always under my supervision, usually on a Sunday each month. They would meet at the park, have ice cream, talk. Howard tried to be a good father on these occasions, brought presents, played, showed interest, but there was always an awkwardness between them, a distance they couldn't overcome. "He doesn't like me," Howard told me once after returning Kevin from one of these meetings. "I feel like he doesn't want to be with me." "He's just a child," I replied, trying not to sound too harsh. "Give him time." But I knew it wasn't just a matter of time. Kevin, even so young when everything happened, seemed to retain a memory, a negative impression of that period. It wasn't something he expressed in words, partly because we didn't talk about the past. But it was there, in the way he tensed up when he knew he was going to see his father, in the evident relief when he returned home. At home, it was just him and me. I hadn't been in a relationship with anyone since the divorce, not for lack of opportunities. The bakery put me in contact with many people, and occasionally some man would show interest. But I had built a wall around my heart. Howard's betrayal with my own grandmother had destroyed my ability to trust, until I met James. James was a widower, father of 4 grown children. He had a small furniture factory in the neighboring town. He came to my bakery in June 1977 to order a cake for his youngest daughter's birthday, who was turning 18. "I want something special," he said with that deep and calm voice that soon captivated me. "She really likes flowers. Maybe a garden-shaped cake." We sat down to discuss the details. James was 52 at the time. I was 37. He was a tall man, with graying hair, large, calloused hands from a lifetime of working with wood. He had kind brown eyes and a shy smile that appeared rarely, but when it did, it lit up his whole face. We talked for almost an hour. He told me about his daughter, about how nervous he was about the party, since his wife had always taken care of these things before she passed away 3 years ago, a victim of cancer. He spoke of his other children, of the small grandchildren he already had, of his work at the carpentry shop. "And you?" he asked suddenly. "Do you have a family?" "A son," I replied, showing the photo of Kevin that I kept on the counter. "He's 7 now." "The father?" he began hesitantly. "We're divorced," I said simply. I didn't go into details, of course. He nodded without asking more questions. At that time, being divorced still carried a stigma, but he didn't seem to judge. We made the cake for the party, one of the most beautiful I had ever created. He came to pick it up on the scheduled day, paid, thanked me, and I thought I would never see him again. But a week later, he was back. "The cake was a success," he said, smiling that rare smile. "Marianne was delighted. Everyone asked where we had bought it." "I'm glad," I replied, genuinely happy. He stood there for a moment, as if gathering courage to say something. Finally, he said, would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" I was surprised. I wasn't expecting that. It had been so long since I had gone out with a man that I didn't know how to respond. "I don't know," I stammered. "I have Kevin, the shop." "I understand," he politely retreated. "It was just an idea. I'm sorry if I was forward." "No, you weren't forward," I managed to say. "It's just that it's been a long time since I went out with anyone." "I think I'm out of practice." He smiled understandingly. "How about coffee then, right here? One of these days, at a time that's best for you." Coffee seemed less intimidating. I agreed, and so began our relationship. Slowly, carefully, like two wounded people who are afraid of getting hurt again. Coffee turned into lunch, which turned into dinner, which turned into a walk in the park with Kevin. My son, to my surprise, adored Uncle James from the first meeting. Maybe because James was so different from his father. Calm where Howard was impulsive, patient where Howard was hurried, attentive where Howard was distracted. We dated for almost a year before he asked me to marry him. It was on a May night in 1978, after a simple dinner at the apartment where he lived alone since his youngest daughter got married. "We don't need to rush," he said, holding my hands in his. "We can wait as long as you want, but I want you to know that I love you, and I'll love your son as if he were my own." I cried. I couldn't help it. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a happiness I didn't think I'd feel again. "Yes," I answered between sobs. "Yes, I want to marry you." We married in September of that year in a small and intimate ceremony. Just his children, some close friends, Kevin as the ring bearer. Howard wasn't invited, of course, but he sent a gift for his son. A new bicycle, Kevin's dream at the time. James had a large, comfortable house in the same neighborhood where he had raised his children. We decided to live there, and I rented out the small 2-story house I had inherited from my parents. The rental income was added to the revenue from the bakery, which continued to prosper. Howard's shop, on the other hand, was getting worse and worse. He lost employees, lost customers, reached a point where he only handled emergencies, small repairs. I heard that he started drinking, that he was always in a bad mood, that he pushed away even the few friends he had. I didn't feel pleasure in his misfortune, I swear. Just a kind of poetic justice. He had destroyed our family, destroyed my trust in people, almost destroyed my life. If now he was reaping what he sowed, it wasn't by my direct action. The worst came in 1980. Howard had an accident at the shop. A car that was on the lift fell on him, crushing his legs. He survived, but became paraplegic. He would never walk again. I found out from his sister, who called to let me know. "I thought you should know," she said. "Because of Kevin." I was in shock. Despite everything, I didn't wish Howard ill. Not to this extent. "How is he?" I asked. "Bad," she answered honestly. "Not just physically. He's depressed, talks about killing himself. The shop will have to close. He has no way to support himself." I remained silent, processing this information. Part of me, the hurt, wounded part, thought, serves him right. But another part, the mother of his son, felt an unexpected compassion. "What's going to happen to him?" I finally asked. "I'll take him to live with me in Pittsburgh," she explained. "I have space. I can take care of him, but it's far. He won't be able to see Kevin frequently." This worried me. As complicated as their relationship was, Kevin needed his father. And now, with Howard disabled, it might be even more important to maintain that bond. "Let me know when you're settled," I said. "I'll bring Kevin to visit him." She thanked me, emotional. "You're a good person, Betty, despite everything my brother did." I hung up the phone with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. I would never be able to completely forgive what Howard did. It was more like liberation, realizing that the anger, the resentment, no longer had the same power over me, that I had truly moved on. I told James about the accident. He, with that quiet wisdom that always impressed me, just nodded. "We should help him if we can," he said simply. I looked at this incredible man that destiny had put in my life and thought, how blessed I am. I lost a lot, but I gained even more. In the following weeks, we helped organize Howard's move to Pittsburgh. James, who knew about carpentry, adapted a wheelchair to make it more comfortable. I prepared some meals that could be frozen for the first days in the new home. Kevin, now 10 years old, learned about the accident and wanted to see his father before the move. I took him to the hospital. It was a difficult visit. Howard was dejected, thin, with deep circles under his eyes. He seemed to have aged 10 years. "Hi, son," he said, his voice weak. "Sorry you see me like this." Kevin, always so talkative, remained silent, looking at his father in that hospital bed, at the immobilized legs, at the tubes and equipment. "Are you going to get better?" he finally asked. Howard looked at me, then back at his son. "I won't walk again," he explained, trying to sound strong. "But I'll get better in other ways. I'll learn to live like this." Kevin nodded seriously. Then, surprising both of us, he approached the bed and hugged his father. It was a quick hug, a bit awkward, but sincere. "I'll visit you in Pittsburgh," he promised. Howard couldn't answer. He just nodded, his eyes watery. Leaving the hospital, Kevin held my hand, something he no longer did frequently, thinking himself too big for that, and asked, "Mom, why did you and Dad separate?" The question caught me by surprise. We had never talked openly about it. What to say to a 10-year-old child? I couldn't tell the complete truth. It was too heavy. "Sometimes, two people who loved each other stop loving each other," I answered, choosing my words carefully. "Not because one is bad or the other is good, but because people change, take different paths." "But you're still angry with him," he observed, perceptive as always. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, realizing it was true. "I'm at peace, and you should be too. Your father made mistakes, like all of us, but he loves you. That never changed." Kevin remained silent for a moment, digesting my words. Then he asked, "Do you think Grandma Gertrude also made mistakes?" My heart raced. He remembered Grandma Gertrude. Did he remember what he had seen? "Yes," I replied cautiously. "She also made mistakes. That's why she left." "Because of the mistakes?" "Yes, because of that, but she also loved you in her own way." He nodded, as if that made sense to him. We didn't talk more about the subject that day, nor in the following days, but I felt that something had been resolved for him, some piece of the puzzle that finally fit. Time flew by after that. The 80s brought changes, challenges, joys. Victory Sweets expanded. We opened a second store in 1983, this time in a shopping mall that opened in the neighboring town. It was a bold step. At the time, malls were a novelty, an American concept that was just beginning to gain space. Many traditional merchants turned up their noses. They said it wouldn't work, that Americans preferred street commerce. James supported me from the first moment. "The world is changing, Betty," he would say. "We have to change with it." And he was right. The mall store was a success from its inauguration. I had to hire more employees, expand production, even buy a small van to transport the sweets between the original store, where the main kitchen was located, and the new branch. Kevin entered adolescence with the normal difficulties of this phase, but without major problems. He was a boy, now a young man, studious, responsible, sensitive. He visited his father in Pittsburgh regularly every 2 months. Howard never walked again, but managed to establish a reasonably comfortable life in his sister's house. He started working with accounting, something he could do from home, sitting down. He didn't earn much, but enough to feel useful, to maintain some dignity. The child support he paid for Kevin decreased considerably after the accident, but I didn't mind. James and I were able to give our son everything he needed, and it was important for Kevin to know that his father, even with limitations, still strived to contribute. In 1984, the greatest joy, Kevin was accepted to study engineering at MIT. It was quite a celebration. We threw a surprise party for him, bringing together school friends, neighbors, James's relatives, who already treated him like a grandson. Even Howard came from Pittsburgh to participate. It was the first time that the two, James and Howard, met in person. I confess I was nervous. I didn't know how it would be, but I didn't need to worry. James, always a gentleman, treated Howard with respect and consideration. Howard, in turn, was polite and even thanked James for taking such good care of my son and Betty. It was a touching moment that showed how we had all matured, overcome the hurts of the past. Kevin in college meant another phase in our lives. He continued living with us, but it was almost as if he had moved out. He spent all day at MIT, had study groups at night, on weekends went out with his new friends. The house became quieter, emptier. That's when James had the idea that would change our lives again. "Why don't we expand the business?" he suggested one night after dinner. "We combine your bakery with my carpentry." At first, I thought the idea was strange. What would sweets have to do with furniture? But then he explained. "We can create a line of specific furniture for bakeries, cafes, tables, chairs, counters, display cases. I already have some designs." He showed me the sketches he had made. They were beautiful, elegant, functional pieces that combined wood and metal in a contemporary but welcoming way. "And you can create a line of cafes and sweet shops inside the furniture stores," he continued enthusiastically. "People come to see the furniture, have a coffee, try a sweet, stay longer, feel at ease." It was an idea ahead of its time. Today we see it everywhere, furniture stores with built-in cafeterias, but in 1985 it was revolutionary. And it worked extraordinarily well. We called the new business Home and Flavor. We opened the first unit in 1986 in an old mansion that we adapted in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. It was a furniture store on the first floor and a bakery on the ground floor. Customers could see the furniture in use, the tables, chairs, counters, while enjoying the sweets and coffees. The success was immediate and much greater than we expected. In 2 years, we opened 3 more units in different parts of the city. We had to expand both the carpentry and the central suite kitchen. We hired dozens of employees. Kevin, who was in his 3rd year of engineering, began to take an interest in the family business. He applied what he learned in college to improve our processes, make production more efficient. In 1989 came the big surprise. Kevin introduced us to Beatrice, his college girlfriend. A beautiful, intelligent, determined young woman who studied architecture. They had met in an interdisciplinary project between the engineering and architecture courses. I immediately knew it was serious. My son had never brought a girlfriend to meet the family before. Sure enough, less than a year later, in 1990, they announced their engagement. The wedding would be after both graduated, in 1991. I could hardly believe it. My little boy was becoming a man. He was going to build his own family. Howard received the news with emotion. His health was already more fragile at this time. The accident had left sequelae that were getting worse with time, kidney, circulatory problems. But he made a point of participating in all the wedding preparations he could, even from a distance. He personally chose the gift he would give to the couple, a set of fine china that must have cost several months of his modest salary. The wedding took place in March 1991, in a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Garden. Beatrice was stunning in a dress she designed herself. Kevin, elegant in a navy blue suit, seemed bursting with happiness. James and I cried with emotion when they exchanged vows. Howard came for the ceremony, of course, was in the front row in his wheelchair, visibly moved. It was he who made the first toast at the reception. With a choked voice, he said to my son and daughter-in-law, "May you build a family based on love, respect, honesty, values that, unfortunately, I only learned to appreciate too late." There was no bitterness in his words, just a sincere recognition of past mistakes and a genuine desire that his son would tread a better path. I looked at him at that moment and finally felt that forgiveness was possible. Not a forgetting of what happened, but an acceptance, an understanding that we are all fallible. We all make mistakes. The young couple went to live in an apartment near the MIT campus. Kevin had secured a position as a junior engineer at a large construction company, and Beatrice was starting to work at a renowned architecture firm, but both continued involved with the family business. Home and Flavor already had 6 units in New York and plans to expand to other cities. In 1992, the news that made my heart almost burst with joy. "Mom, Dad," said Kevin during a Sunday lunch, "you're going to be grandparents." James and I looked at each other in disbelief for a second. Then we exploded in smiles and tears. A grandson, the continuation of the family, the promise of new joys, new beginnings. Beatrice was radiant during her pregnancy. She had little morning sickness, remained active and working almost until the end. The baby was born in April 1993. A beautiful, healthy boy they named Gabriel. He had his father's eyes, his mother's chin, and, according to James, the same observant look that Kevin had when he was small. Howard met his grandson when Gabriel was 2 weeks old. He was already quite weak at this time, increasingly debilitated by health problems, but when he held his little grandson in his arms, his eyes shone in a way we hadn't seen in a long time. "He has my nose," he said proudly. And he really did have that upturned nose that had passed from Howard to Kevin and now to Gabriel. The continuity of life, despite everything. Gabriel grew up surrounded by love, from his parents, from us, his paternal grandparents, from his maternal grandparents, from Howard, whom he called Grandpa H. In the first years, we would take the boy to Pittsburgh frequently so he could spend time with his grandfather. Later, when Howard became sicker and had to be hospitalized frequently, the visits became rarer. In 1997, we received the call that, in a way, we had been expecting for years. Howard had suffered a massive heart attack during the night. He didn't survive. He passed away in his sleep without suffering, according to the doctors. Kevin was devastated. Despite everything, he loved his father. He cried like a child when he received the news. Beatrice, always sensitive, suggested that we give Gabriel, then 4 years old, an album with photos of his grandfather, so he never forgets, she said. The funeral was simple, as Howard would have wanted. Cremation, followed by a small ceremony where we scattered the ashes in Lake Michigan, his last home. Kevin spoke some emotional words about his father, about the good moments, the lessons learned, the love that, despite the mistakes, never ceased to exist. Driving back to New York after the funeral, in the car with James, I found myself thinking about how life takes turns, how destiny leads us down paths we would never have imagined. If someone had told me back in 1972, when I discovered the betrayal, that one day I would be crying over the death of the man who betrayed me, that I would feel genuine sadness at his passing, I would never have believed it. But life teaches us, shapes us, makes us wiser, more compassionate. The pain that Howard caused me was immense, but it also transformed me, made me stronger, more independent, pushed me onto a path that I might otherwise never have taken. It led me to James, to business success, to a full and fulfilled life that I never imagined having. And today, at 72 years old, looking back, I see that the greatest revenge against those who hurt you is not hatred, not resentment, not even success thrown in their face. It's genuine happiness. It's moving forward. It's building such a good, such a full life that the pain of the past becomes just a distant memory, a scar that no longer hurts. I have my husband, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson, who is now 30 years old and has given me a beautiful great-granddaughter, little Clara. I have my prosperous businesses. Home and Flavor now has units in 5 states, managed by Kevin and Beatrice. I have health, I have peace. That's the message I want to leave for you, dear viewers. Life is going to knock us down many times and in ways we cannot predict. We will cry, we will suffer, we will think that we will not be able to get up. But we get up, we always get up. And when we look back, we realize that it was precisely these moments of pain that made us who we are. My husband cheated on me with my 87-year-old grandmother. Sounds like a soap opera, doesn't it? But it was real. It was my life. And today I am thankful for having gone through it, because it brought me here, to this life that I love, to you who are listening to me. The pain passes, love remains, forgiveness liberates, and life, life always continues surprising us, teaching us, giving us new chances. That's my story. I hope it has touched your hearts in some way. And if you're going through something difficult right now, remember, this too shall pass, and you'll be stronger afterward. Believe it. Thank you for listening to an old lady talking about the past. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. This grandma here thanks you. A warm hug to all of you.